This video is brought to you by TAMS. TAMS is providing a diverse and collaborative environment where every voice counts, such as advancing accessibility across the travel industry, where TAMS is gathering insights from travelers with various accessibility needs, and by advocating for the standards and best practices we learn. The following interview is about traveling with PTSD, featuring Zach Riggle, organized by Mike Daly.
So thank you everybody for joining for this premiere of the TAMS Advancing Accessibility in Travel series. And today we're going to be premiering our video on PTSD. Back actually in November of 2022, we conducted this interview with Zach Riggle, who works with the Heroic Hearts Project as their director of operations. And Zach himself also suffers from PTSD, and the Heroic Hearts Project itself specializes in military veterans who suffer from PTSD and helping them with their issues and finding cures and solutions. And we learned a lot about PTSD during this interview. And I think what's important with PTSD is you realize, it's not just Army veterans. There's folks from, a variety of different backgrounds that have PTSD for various reasons. So it's a fairly large market of folks that have PTSD. And as we'll learn today, a lot of it has to do with security and making sure that folks with PTSD don't have triggers and feel safe during their travels. So without further ado, we're going to now premiere the video. It'll be about an hour and 2 minutes long. So we may go over slightly, but Anne, if you want to kick us off.
Nonprofit called Heroic Hearts Project. And I've started to talk with these guys in that organization about getting involved. And I thought this would be a great forum to increase awareness of PTSD in general. So with that, Zach, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, give a little bit of background on yourself to the team, and then maybe even talk about specifically PTSD, because I think maybe not everybody understands it. I certainly don't understand it well enough, and I think that would be helpful to start there.
Okay. First, thanks for having me here. I don't know if this is in my bio anywhere. Prior to my current role, so I'm the COO for a nonprofit called Heroic Hearts Project, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But prior to this, up until COVID, I was the CEO of a nonprofit in Dallas called the Adaptive Training Foundation. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with ATF. ATF is one of the probably, if not the top-notch training facility for adaptive athletes in the US. It's one of them. They work with both elite athletes and just a 35-year-old mom who just lost a limb and now has to learn how to overcome this trauma in her life, or someone in their 30s or 40s who are diagnosed with Parkinson's or severe forms of epilepsy. It's life-changing things. And so the couple of years I spent there really opened my eyes to what life is like for people different from me, or who have other limitations or other challenges. And so seeing things through that lens really kind of just redefined my professional life. And then I ended up here now with Heroic Hearts doing something a little bit different. So Mike, I think that's probably the best way to start is just with PTSD in general, kind of helping to understand. I wrote in my notes here, it's like, we think PTSD, we think, okay, the guys who 4th of July have the signs in their yard about fireworks. Yeah, not really. Maybe in a severe case, but no, usually no. It's really a lot more complex than that. Yeah. And which means kind of the response, available responses and kind of a menu of things that we can provide are also pretty challenging on how you can help out. So if it's okay, I'll start with just kind of basically an expanded notion of PTSD. This is Zach's opinion. So I guess before we get into that, So I was a former Marine and Marine Raider. A Marine Raider is the Marine version of a SEAL. So it started in 2006. So we have our assessment and selection, and kind of we go through that. We're selected, and then we work for SOCOM, so the Special Operations Command. So I spent half my career there and half in the regular Marine Corps. I deployed 4 times, but those 4 times spread over 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So 3 deployments to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan, which means that over the time I spent a little over 3 years in Iraq and about a year in Afghanistan. Pretty much back to back to back to back. So 41 out of 60 months I was deployed, which what I believed at the time was that was better for me because that meant that I didn't have information gaps. I was an intelligence officer. And so the better that I understood things on the ground, the better it was for us. But I didn't at that time understand the damage that I was doing to the brain by not giving myself adequate time to rest and reset in between, which plays heavily into what I do now. I left the military in 2012. I went to business school. I was a Sloan Fellow for Innovation and Global Leadership at MIT. I stayed on as a research scientist. Just lost you. Okay. Stayed on as a research scientist for a bit afterwards, looking specifically at PTSI, and enterprise healthcare systems. So realizing that most of our healthcare systems see, well, most things, but particularly mental health issues as continuum care models rather than healing models. So instead of putting the money and investment up front to appropriately diagnose, they just patch things up and expect to see you again, 30, 60, 90 days down the road for the rest of your life. And that we won't get into that, but finished business school, went into the business world for a while in emerging market finance. And then I was a tech consultant. So I was the managing director at one firm and the COO at another. And things were great until my brain just stopped functioning, basically. There's really not another way to say it. It would take me a day to get through or respond to an email. I would pray that my staff wouldn't talk to me on the way into my desk because I wouldn't be able to respond to them. I couldn't think quickly enough to answer their questions, and I would get lost in our conversation. I could no longer speak to clients or interact with clients. I developed a speech impediment. I got to the point where I didn't want to leave my house because my social anxiety was so bad that I couldn't interact with people. And for me, that meant that eventually I started drinking a lot and then went down the road with drugs, basically did that until the second to last exit, and was able to get off of that and start rebuilding myself. And during that journey is where I first realized, like, oh, maybe this is trauma. And this all came at one of the rehab centers that I was at. They had an amazing medical library, and I convinced, just due to my background, I convinced the counselors that instead of going to these classes that weren't helping, could I please just go to the library and learn and research? And I did. And that's what first took me to trauma. And it wasn't maybe this is a thing. It was like, oh man, like just down the list. And that's when I first understood. And by understanding, that meant that, I recognized that this was a thing, a real thing, and other people had dealt with it. And that meant that maybe there was a way that I could deal with it, which gave me hope then to start figuring that out. So I did. And that journey, which was actually a couple of years, I finished everything I should have finished and felt like, I should be good now. I'm sober. I've done all these therapy, all these group sessions and whatever. I had just stumbled into an amazing job, which was the Adaptive Training Foundation. And things should have been good, but most mornings I didn't want to get out of bed. And most evenings I was still suicidal and something was still broken. And so one day on social media, I saw the guy that used to work for me, and he's smiling and playing with his kids. And that's not the guy that I knew. I knew a guy that was angry, and he was a killer. He was one of our operators. And so I called him up and asked, what's your secret? And he told me plant medicine, man. And I didn't know what that was, but I Googled it. And 3 weeks later, I was in Peru on an ayahuasca retreat, and it saved my life. So coming back from that, I had to figure out what is it that I want to do. I threw my suits back on, came back to New York, and started interviewing back in the banking sector. And within a week of that, I'm like, this isn't me. This never was, and it for sure isn't now. And I realized that what me is now is someone who needs to help people. So I realized my purpose is to help people find a better way to heal, whatever that means for them. And it might be plant medicines, it might be psychedelics, it might just be learning how to live different and understanding that there's healing in things like community and meditation and mindfulness and nutrition and physicality and all these things other than the bucket of pills that a lot of times they try and hand you at the doctor's office. So as part of that, I now co-run a nonprofit called Heroic Hearts Project. And I've also developed or dedicated my life to figuring out trauma, to researching trauma. So I specialize in developmental trauma now. And that's where I'll kind of transition into this piece. So PTSD, we think of like the fireworks in the yard. I mentioned that. That's because our understanding is often just limited to what in the military they call a qualifying incident. So what was the bad thing that happened? So the IED that went off and killed your buddy right next to you, or something similar at that level. And that is a thing, and that does happen a percentage of the time. But usually that's not the only thing. And this is I don't know why, but this is kind of a disputed notion in the standard medical space, is they see PTSD is PTSD. Well, my argument, this comes from Dr. What's the last name? Judith Herman from Harvard in 1997. All PTSD that affects you this way is complex PTSD, meaning it's happened before, right? So our systems do an amazing job of clearing trauma. I mean, this magical machine that we walk around in every day. We can even do a decent job of clearing trauma in series when it happens again and again and again, as long as there's time in between to appropriately process it. But when there's not, and we start to build up residual trauma, our ability to process trauma diminishes as trauma builds up in our system. And so quickly that becomes a reinforcing loop that just overwhelms your system. And then you get stuck in a trauma response, which we most commonly know as the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fawn's kind of the unknown, the fourth sibling there, which is I tend to just yes man. I have the ability to do whatever. I just don't want to make you angry and make things worse. So I'll just agree with whatever you say. So for most people, most veterans, most active duty military, people who reach the level of PTSD where it impacts them in some way, it's actually complex trauma. So it's a series of things that happened over their life. And most of the time that's something that happened during the developmental years that made them feel the need to overachieve, overdefend, overprotect. And those things that motivated them and helped them reach these usually pretty high achievements. But then there became a point where they could no longer outrun it. And that's where the traumas kind of started to overwhelm the system. So I say all that to say we don't just have to address. We're not just looking at the one thing, the qualifying incident. Usually there's a life of incidents. There's a whole lot of stuff that's happened. And that's important here because earlier on, it's not bombs going off. Earlier on, it's most of the time, it's someone not appropriately or adequately being seen or recognized or valued as an individual, or they didn't feel safe. And so these are some things that we can help with now. For people when they're in this activated trauma response. So what happens for someone with PTSD? What is it actually like? First of all, you have a diminished response flexibility, meaning that when I'm faced with a problem, when something happens, let's say a problem, that was someone cuts me off in traffic, there's a very short list of responses that I turn to because I don't have the ability to activate higher level functional thought because I'm stuck in a trauma response, right? So when you're activated in trauma, that means you feel like you're about to be attacked or you are being attacked. So that increases your threat sensitivity. So my sensitivity is up, so I perceive more threats, but I don't have the ability to dismiss them the way that I normally would because I can't activate my high level functional thought because that part of my brain has shut down to protect me. So I just feel like I'm going to be attacked from everywhere. And this can be a physical attack. This can be just an angry attack, like, why are you always picking on me? Or why? This happens a lot with the relationships. Someone says something, oh, I didn't mean that at all. You perceive that you're under attack. when you live in that space, then you start to have I call like a negatively shaped worldview. It's like tinted. So it goes from, why are you angry at me to everybody's after me. This can happen on the world stage. So not talking anything about politics, just looking at a person like President Trump was largely like this. Someone who's kind of stuck in a trauma response and sees everybody as attacked, which means everything's defensive. Everything that I say back, it's not a normal conversation. I can't have a normal conversation because I'm not able to activate that higher level functional thought. And so I just have my barb that I'm about to send back to you. And this is kind of what you see or understand, especially working in travel and like the airline industry. I'm sorry, your flight's canceled. I can't get you on the next one, whatever. Well, this is why is everything happening to me? Right. And so then I'm defensive and barbing right back. So those are kind of the main things. Let's see, inability. Oh, and the last one is the inability to remain in the moment. I can't be present here because I'm either stuck in my trauma and feeling like that's happening again, like I'm being attacked again and again, or I'm catastrophizing about what might happen in the future and how I can possibly try and keep myself safe, or I'm just completely tuning out. And so I can't just be here and have a conversation. And so those are kind of the main things that are going on in someone's mind. This leads to isolation and depression, largely hopelessness. The main factor of hope is growth, right? So my ability to look at this current situation and believe that things are going to get better or have the ability to get better and improve, that's growth. That's post-traumatic growth, which leads to hope that my life's going to get better. But I don't have that if I'm trapped in the PTSD, an activated trauma response. So that's kind of how that's the filtered world that someone struggling with PTSD lives in, and how it can tend to compound upon itself and quickly get out of control.
Zach, you mentioned, thank you for that, by the way, that was incredible and really thoughtful and helpful. Question, you had mentioned PTSI, and what is the difference between PTSI and PTSD?
Yeah, so the PTSI, the I for that one was innovations, post-traumatic stress innovations. We're just looking at the healthcare system and places where we could potentially improve it. PTS versus PTSD is kind of the argument. Okay. Some highly sensitive people would, they prefer the disorder part not to be there, because then it kind of becomes more of a label. I think labels are helpful sometimes, so I don't necessarily mind it, but that's kind of individual's choice.
Got it. Very helpful. Thank you.
Hey Zach, can you? And I really want to dive into this experience of traveling with PTSD and what that's like. Before we do that, can you just maybe talk? I'm sure with PTSD, it's not all equal. There's a spectrum. There's probably folks with slighter variations of PTSD versus, maybe something, something that's more traumatic, more serious. Can you just perhaps just touch on maybe that spectrum of PTSD a little bit? Is there? And I'm trying to eventually understand, because not all travelers are equal either, so trying to understand that spectrum would be helpful.
Yeah, kind of depending where you are. I'll throw, sometimes it's helpful to do this, sometimes it's not. But I think in this case, it would be traumatic brain injury. I'll throw that in. Usually that follows, it can be associated. So it's not always involved, but it oftentimes is. Putting those two together can cause some additional issues. There can be some cognitive issues. So I can speak specifically for myself. When I'm in an activated response, I have a pretty severe cognitive delay, which means that it's almost like having a hearing impairment of some sort. Or if Andrew, as you're talking, I would be staring at you, but I wouldn't actually be hearing you, because I would be working on turning whatever I'm whatever this is happening here, I'm trying to turn that into words that I can understand. And so there can be a 5 to 10 second delay, which in our society is uncommon, right? We don't like quiet, and we feel like we have to fill blank space with something. So if in a formal environment, if I'm working with an associate or I'm in a restaurant, I don't have that time because it's uncomfortable and someone wants to fill it. So that's one. Speech impediment, losing words, losing track in the middle of a conversation, that can happen because I'm just not able to follow what's going on. That can be pretty common, or just forgetting that even 2 minutes ago that we covered something. That can happen a lot, and sometimes that's due to brain damage, and sometimes it's due to just stress stuff. So I can talk about those. Just so yeah, that's kind of, I forgot what the rest of.
Thank you. Travel
Some
often.
symptoms, like symptomology, right? That was part of it.
Yep.
Temperature is a big one. So what's the best way to go into this one? This is a hormonal, it's an endocrine system response. So your body, your system has been pelted with stress hormones so much above and beyond what it was built to process and maintain, that can severely impact your endocrine system, so your hormonal response. So if I am at a hormonal imbalance, my whole regulation system is kind of on the fritz, which means temperatures they go from extremes. Most of the time, people in a trauma response run pretty hot. So things on the outside, like warm temperatures, can really, like if I'm a little bit activated or aggravated and it's like moderately warm, then I'm 1,000 degrees in here, and that just makes it worse, right? It just compounds things. It'll go from that then to the severe, a lot of times just a severe shift. So I'll go from that to like freezing, like once I cool down, like once I'm not angry anymore, then I can freeze. So there's just regulatory systems aren't working in the same way that they should. Those are some of the biggest ones that are kind of physically notable. And then just being argumentative, or just like kind of stuck in this angry mode. That's the other one, because you are angry. You're angry at the entire world because you feel like the entire world is out to get you.
I could just imagine in travel there being a lot of triggers. When you're traveling, you're interacting with a lot of strangers. And I mean, as any experienced traveler will tell you, everybody runs into moments where we end up in a frustrating moment that triggers any normal person gets triggered, at the ticketing counter because the flight was canceled or delayed, or you were pushed off the flight, or you showed up to the hotel, the room wasn't ready, or as you had asked for it to be, or there's a host of different. So I feel like this traveling itself could be very triggering for somebody with PTSD. I could see that being the case, and maybe Zach is a good lead into getting more into the travel side of things. Do you travel yourself often?
I do. It took me a long time to get back to be able to do that. Going back to what I said, I think one of the earlier things was one of the biggest issues with PTSD is a diminished response flexibility. And so I don't have the ability to just roll with it, right? I mean, I do, because of a lot of work, right? A lot of work that's been done. But for those that are really activated or stuck in a PTSD world, you don't have that ability to just be flexible, to just kind of roll with the punches. And that means that you don't generally like to leave your comfort zone, and kind of go out into the big scary world. And the travel world is a big scary world. So that means those times when you do have to travel, it's really, really challenging, because there's so many things that are out of your control.
How do you, so let's start from the beginning of travel. Usually it starts with the booking process. You know, how would somebody with PTSD approach the booking process itself, actually going in and booking the travel? Like how, you know,
Call an agent, or you just use a consumer site.
Yeah, I think it starts the way most people would, like consumer site, whatever's good. It starts with whatever seems like it's going to be the easiest. I can say that plan can oftentimes just quickly derail. And then you're just looking for what should be the easiest, kind of the easiest option from that. This is where, I think there have been times when I wanted something or nothing more than to be able to ask someone for help. And so an automated system wasn't ideal, but the challenges that come with trying to find a person, or once you get into the regular, like in the airline world, almost feeling like you're penalized for needing to talk to a person, that can be really challenging and then make me even more angry. So I'm what I would consider a fairly highly functioning person, but I'm not able to do the things that I need to do just to book like on a site. And that can be really frustrating. And then I want to talk to a person to ask for help, but I can't find the help. And then that just makes it worse. And then just kind of, a lot of times it would devolve into just kind of a puddle of, I can't do this right now. And hang up, or, try again later. And I think that happens far more frequently than what sometimes people realize. Service support dogs, yeah, they can be very helpful. I don't have one. Kind of one of my reasons was traveling so much and being around, and then the process to get one, I never went through with it. They can be very helpful in helping people just to decompress and kind of stay present. That's one of their primary functions.
With that booking process, because I think in the travel world, there's a lot of evolution happening in that space where there's kind of, if you're booking online, for example, there's kind of like two different methodologies that are out there. One is very like custom. Like I go into, in this corporate world, Concur is the biggest booking tool. I go to my Concur tool and I select my hotel, I select my airline, select my car rental. I'm doing it all in there. I put in my dates, and then I'm choosing which airline I want to take. I'm choosing which hotel I'm going to stay in. And that's a very like I'm selecting everything as I go. The other type of booking that we see out there today is this is the date, and this is where I need to go. And then the system spits out to you and tells you exactly, the airline, the hotel, it basically just feeds it all to you. So you don't have to put much into it. Somebody with PTSD is there, I could see the pros and cons of both. What you described early on, it makes me seem like for you, you'd rather just push a button and it tell you what to go do versus going through, that detail of trying to choose which airline, which hotel, that kind of frustration that can happen. But I would also say, on the other side, that approach allows you to be more customized and maybe find an airline that meets your schedule better, a hotel that might be in a certain location that might be to your benefit. Allows more of that customization. What could you see being the preferred, booking path for somebody with PTSD?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all thing. I think as long as there's an option, as long as there's an option for me to get some help from a human, I think that's probably the most important thing. Booking things as you're talking about it is something that it's something we at Heroic Hearts have to deal with regularly. So most of the people that we're working with are fairly severely, are working very severely challenged with PTSD. And I would say we book probably about half of their tickets for them, because it's shouldn't seem like it is too much, but it's too much to get someone from Des Moines to a small town in central Peru. To have to go through where do I need a passport? Where do I not need a passport? Can I stop at this airport? It's too much. So in situations like that, either a lot of times their spouse will book it for them, or we will, just because they don't have kind of the travel agent option of, this is where I need to end up. Can I just tell you where I need to end up, and then you fix everything for me and charge me and send me an email? Like that's not really, unfortunately, in most of our society today, that's not an option anymore.
Mike, do you have any other questions on the booking tool being with
No, not so much on the booking side, but I'd like to understand more about your process and going to the airport and checking in. Do you try to choose maybe non-peak days and non-peak times to do that? Have you come up with a strategy when you travel, because you do travel frequently?
Yeah, so again, for me, I've kind of I've overcome. I've dealt with my challenges enough so I live in New York, I live in Brooklyn. So it's like, I figured out how to survive, right?
Yep.
For others, it would be ideal to be able to do that. It's just, I really don't know any tools, as you talk about it, other than, the Google sometimes says, it's only 70% busy here, or, this isn't peak busy. I've found it pretty challenging. I think we all probably love it when we find those, like, oh man, DFW on Thursdays at 8 a.m. On Thursday, October 20th at 8 a.m. DFW is awesome. In the grand scheme, like, does that really do me any good? Because I can't like map that out and use that for planning. If there was a tool that helped me with that, then that would be great. I just haven't. That's not what I've been able to figure out.
And then in terms of hotels that you stay at, is there any particular types of properties that stand out that maybe, I don't know, that the style or the way those hotels operate that's more conducive that you found in your experience?
This is broader than just PTSD. I think this was just when I was traveling a lot as a consultant, just learning some kind of tips and tools. Anything in the, oh man, I don't even know who owns anymore. The Westin world, the W Westin world, or Kempton. Is it Kempton? Just because.
I think Kempton
those are
is separate, but
Kempton
W and Westin are both under the Marriott brand now. Yeah, so for the business side, those were kind of good marks. Kempton was for service, which is kind of this was another thing on the PTSD side. Anything, so if I'm severely activated in the PTSD world, I've lost association with myself. So I kind of like, I'm stuck in this either defense mechanism, this defense mode, or I'm identifying as PTSD vet. So I'm identifying as my illness. So anything that can happen to remind me that I'm me. So using my name, starting with a smile. This is like all customer service basics. Even staying human and separating from the challenging instance that's coming up. So if I'm working on rebooking somebody, then having a human conversation here, letting them know I'm separate from this event that's happening, and this isn't because of you. And so anything that can help to rehumanize can be really helpful. So areas where you're able to kind of overdo it on the customer service, or hotels and service places that are over the top, can be really helpful, which is why I kind of went to the Kempton side. Got it. Yeah, and I think that's one of the long-term goals here, is to establish standards that can be shared out with all the suppliers during the journey. And I think along those lines, have you come across any suppliers, let's say airlines, hotels, car rental, even ground transportation, including Uber? Have any of these organizations allowed you to identify yourself? And you know, we talk about labels, you know, to say, hey, be patient with me. Let's, you know, let's work through this, or anything like that.
No, I don't know that I've tried either.
Okay.
And I think there would, you know, that would be a debated topic on. So this, the last thing we said, people who tend to start to identify as their illness rather than themselves. It's kind of, this is a recurring debate, I think, in the adaptive world, is how much do I want to have to say that I need special help, or should that special help just kind of be there?
Right. When you so after you booked and you head to the airport, I mean, the airport itself is crazy. You're trying to get your tickets, you're going through security, you're sitting at your gate, there's a lot of interaction occurring. You know, could be the barrier of bad news during that process, could you find out cancellations, et cetera. Like, talk to us a little bit about going through an airport with PTSD and what that is like, you know, from ticketing to going through like the scanners, et cetera, and what are those pain points?
Yeah, the ticketing piece, I think it can be hit or miss. The TSA part is huge, because that's one of the few places where you can be individually targeted. So TSA agents who, you know, I don't envy them at all. You know, their lives are that part of their life is probably not awesome when they're having to say the same thing over and over and over again. But in that, they forget that this person hasn't heard it over and over and over again. So, you know, it is different from one airport to the other, whether you have to take this off or take this out or move your stuff. And so when you target someone, or when they speak in a tone that sounds like it's targeting you, that can escalate quickly. And I've seen it escalate quickly, you know, just like unnecessarily. So again, it goes to where are places where people can just treat you like a human and leave with a smile, because that can disarm almost any of the negative responses.
You get to that security line, and so it sounds like in that security line, it's really about how friendly the TSA guards are, and if you know, nobody wants to be the one that gets pulled over, right? Your luggage is the one that goes into that side little conveyor, and you have to explain why you left your water bottle in your luggage, right? So it sounds like it's about the temperament that's being used. I mean,
there's another element of it. There's a disarming, I guess, and a vulnerability. So when I have to remove my coat and remove my belt and take my shoes off, I'm in an unguarded, vulnerable position. And then on top of that, if there's what I gauge as a verbal assault, then that's where it really compounds, right? And so it has a lot to do with the disrobing piece. Even though you're still clothed, like you've taken off parts of your safety, so your shoes and your belt, and like you're what you feel like you're in a hyper vulnerable position, and then to feel assaulted on top of that is pretty damaging.
okay. You get through that process and you go to the gate. I mean, the gate you're hanging out, the gate's nice. You know, you can grab yourself something to eat at the restaurant there, and kind of just wait for your aircraft, and you assume it's going to go off on time. What if it gets delayed? Flight gets delayed. What is that feeling like? Is that, okay, well, everybody else is being delayed, so that's okay. I'm part of the, everybody else is in the same boat as me, so it's okay? Or is there any kind of, trigger there because you're staying at that gate and now you're there for an extra hour or two waiting?
Yeah, most of the time, if you're struggling with PTSD, then this is happening specifically to you for some reason. This always happens to me. I should have known better, or I even had I think everyone has a PTSD or not. Sometimes there's just times where you feel it. And I had to laugh. I was flying home for whatever the last holiday, or I don't know, I had like my mom's birthday or something a few months ago. And something I got bumped from 2 flights to the 3rd flight, and I was like, "Are you serious?" So like delayed. All in all, it was like 3 hours. And then I had to laugh when I was arriving in Dallas. My flight is the only one of any of those that actually made it through. All the other ones got canceled for weather or rerouted, and I had to laugh. I'm like, hey, dummy, like sometimes this happens like for good, it's not just evil.
More understanding than I would be.
Yeah, if you're stuck in it, but again, with the diminished response or flexibility, you think all this is happening to you, all this is specifically targeting you because you're being attacked.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice? Something that's fun about this project is I think we have an opportunity to be innovative too. As we go through this, if there's anything that you are thinking, I wish that they had this, I wish that they did something like this a little bit differently, share that. They may not do it today, something through your travel experience. So maybe when you're standing at that gate that happens, is there something that gate attendant could do that would calm the situation, that would make the situation? It sounds like perhaps just more of a personal touch with the individual, but I don't know if there's anything else that could be done during that period that
Yeah, I left something off my notes. Triggers. So for me traveling, travel or anytime, smell is a huge trigger. And fortunately for a lot of military folks, one of those smells is fuel or jet fuel. And like burning, like anything burning, but like burning electronics, things like that. That's just another thing to be wary of. That can be a huge trigger. Other things. Yeah, I think the biggest one that I've thought of so far is in the booking or rebooking or management process, just having a button to push or anything where I can access a human, because sometimes I won't be able to do it on my own.
So you get on a plane. You're sitting there in your seat, or you're trying to get you're getting you're walking in the aircraft. You're in this line of folks that are all trying to get into their seats. Something pushes you. That can happen by accident. Not typical though. You're trying to put your stuff in the overhead bin. Maybe there's not enough room in the overhead bin. You finally go sit down. You sit down in your seat. Would you rather be in an aisle seat? Would you rather be in a window seat? Would you rather be in a middle seat? I mean, if you say middle seat, that'd be really
Yeah. That's not usually my answer. The others for me personally, yeah, I'm 6'4", so I feel like I'm always in the way, especially on a flight. Aisle or window for me personally depends on what time of day it is. Like whether I'll be trying to sleep or if I'm going to be awake. If I'm awake, then I'll be in the aisle. If I'm trying to sleep, then I'll be in the window. But that's just that personal. The rest of it, like these days, everything seems to be so either 100% booked or overbooked that like the days of hoping to get a row by yourself, just those are long gone, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything that you wish was on that flight? So now you're in the air and you're traveling. It's like a 3-hour flight, 4-hour flight, whatever it is. And sometimes you could be sitting there for a long time. You get cramps. Somebody with PTSD, like what's going on through their head in the middle of that flight? I mean, there's folks that have phobias just of flying in general. What is that experience of being in the air? Like, what is that are there any pain points here that we should consider as we're thinking through what could we, we're talking, if we're going back, we're talking with Delta Airlines, and we're saying, hey, Delta, we talked to somebody with PTSD when they're up in the air and stuff, we noticed, they complain about the person coming through the cart hits them, or, like sometimes you get shoved or something like that by accident. Like, what can that airline product, what can they do differently? What could be better that, is kind of would be a focus for somebody with PTSD? Maybe there's not anything. Maybe they're doing their best already. I think one thing that we have found through some other conversation is the lack of training with the flight attendants. They have a lot of good training, but do they have a lot of training on dealing with various different situations? If something escalates, what is their tact? That tact may be different depending on if somebody has autism or they have PTSD. Like, that interaction could be much different depending on what it is, what's triggering them, right? And so trying to understand where could the airlines do better servicing somebody with PTSD, where they would be more confident, more, feeling more confident to get on the airplane.
So I'll address first, Carl, the note that you sent. I haven't heard of the sunflower thing. I think that's great. Even if, it shouldn't be, oh, what's the disability? Like, that shouldn't be the first thing, but just reminding someone, like, oh, okay, this person may have special needs. Andrew, I'd say that it goes back to everything that I'm about to say. They're just good, like, stewardship, good ways to take care of people, right? So to lead with a smile and to ask, is there anything I can do for you? Or when it's a super full flight and someone comes on and they have a rollerboard, instead of leaving it up to them to go all the way down and all the way back and figure out, like, maybe offering them a hand, like, hey, we don't have anything here, maybe up front, like, just offering to assist, which I think is where most people who are there for that role, that's how they are in the beginning. And then they get frustrated and just overcome by events too. And then they're, service degrades. I think just reminders that those things impact some people far more than they do others, sometimes to the point where it's completely debilitating. So what's the Catherine Bigelow movie with the guy in the grocery store at the end, where he's just staring at, like, whatever. I've been the guy in the grocery store where I was there I had a list, like a small list, and I was in the grocery store for 2.5 hours. And at 2.5 hours, I just left my cart, went out to my car in the parking lot, and went to leave, but I would have had a wreck if it wasn't a new car that had, like, the brake sensor things, and it slammed on the brakes for me because I was so overwhelmed that I couldn't even function to drive. So people can very quickly be overwhelmed with stuff. But if there's someone looking them in the eye and saying, sir, are you okay? How can I help you? And meaning it, then that can quickly de-escalate the situation.
So you land, that plane lands, and you are going to get off the plane, and it could be getting off the plane is kind of crazy for anybody and everyone. And you got the plane, you go and you have to go get your luggage, and you're on your way between the terminal, going down and get your luggage. You have to sit there, wait for the carousel with your luggage. Are you, just waiting for it to come out? Anything in that whole process where you think there's opportunity for improvement, that you could see something for somebody with PTSD, whether it's, just, again, getting off the plane, getting to the carousel, anything in there that I think comes down again to service. Maybe they lost their baggage, Zach, or they lose their baggage. What is that feeling like for somebody with PTSD? What is that experience? How is that going to be handled? Would that be a trigger for somebody potentially? What is anything in that area?
Yeah. Yeah, everything bad that happens is both a trigger and feels like it always happens to you. You know, I'm being targeted. So again, the most helpful thing to counter that is just to be as humanizing as possible and explain, remind the person like, oh, this happens. I can't always say this happens all the time, but we'll do everything we can to, to take care of it. And just try and make light of it as much as possible. Maybe it's even in explaining what happened. A lot of times people think, oh, they don't even know. Well, if I understand that, this whole section of whatever wasn't working at DFW, so none of these people got their bags, like, hey, then it's not just me. And when I realized, like, oh, this happens to everybody, then I'm not as angry because I don't feel so singled out or targeted.
When you get into ground transportation, I think that seems something to unpack here. In one way, something like Uber is great. That's very personalized. You show up, your driver knows your name, you get in the car, they're there for you, they already know where you're going to go. That's a very customized experience, right? They might have a water for you in the Uber. Sometimes they do that, like nice little things like that, right? The other hand is you might get a rental car. Maybe you go to Avis, you get your rental car. You mentioned earlier about, because newer technology has a lot more like bells and whistles around security, like, you're changing lanes, the lights blinking, or you slam on your brakes, or you get too close to the car in front of you, there's a big red light, that pops up on the, the front of the car. That triggers things. Talk a little bit about that space around, whether it's taking an Uber or it's getting a rental car. What are those?
Yeah.
What's that experience like with somebody with PTSD? What would be a best in class for somebody with PTSD in that area?
You do it, Andrew. You do an excellent job of providing enough detail to let me activate and feel. So as you talk about the Uber and the water and the personalized service, I'm like, yeah, it's really nice. And then you compare it to car rental when in a number of places now, I think just due to travel bookings, you'll book a car somewhere and you show up and they don't have cars, even though you've reserved it. So now you're stuck in a place where you have to drive 1, 2, 3 hours to get to another commitment, and you can't because there's no cars and there's no cars in sight. And none of the other rental places there have cars. And so this has happened to me, 3 times in the last year. Well, what good is that reservation if it's not a reservation, right? So that's just someone with PTSD that's a shutdown moment. Like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And you're sitting, you're just overwhelmed with emotions because you have a commitment that now you can't make it to, and there's not a viable alternative most of the time. That's one. Another one is, depending on the severity of your illness, like, people a lot of times their lives are in the dumpster, or they have been for an amount of time, which affects them financially, which means a lot of times you don't have credit cards. And if you need to travel, you may be financially viable. You may have $20,000 in the account, but you don't have a credit card, so you can't rent a car. But you didn't know that because you've never encountered this before. Well, then what? So you're stuck in this place. Again, you have a commitment you need to get to, and you have money, but you didn't read the small print or didn't understand the small print and don't know that you can't travel without a credit card. And there's not an alternative. That can be really challenging. So now you're paying, a $300 Uber to try and get to your place. So that's just, in places, I feel like most car rentals, other than like the Hertz and who's the other like large one, they're usually notably more expensive. And so most veterans don't go to them first because they don't understand that, yeah, you're paying more, but there's service involved in that. And there's like dependability built into it. So that's not I don't know that that's necessarily a travel industry thing other than educating the customer. Because small print can really screw some people over.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How about that, some of that car technology though? Is that good? Those sensors, those warning signs, is that something? Because I can't see that being triggering. It triggers me sometimes. Like I had to rent a car last week actually, an Explorer, and you know I I got too close to the back of another car, and the amount of like red warning, like stop, was kind of crazy. Like, is there anything to that? Like when you rent a car, is there preferences on the technology in the car?
I would say, as I kind of disclosed some self-disclosure there, things like that can be very helpful to someone whose sensory system may be partially shut down or just or totally overwhelmed. So I would say in those places, I think that there are some other challenges with how you phase in automated systems. That's a different conversation. But for this one, I think usually those technologies are beneficial for someone in the situations that we're talking about.
Okay. And okay, so you get that rental car, you get to, or you took an Uber to the hotel. Go to this hotel and you go to check in, and that can be pretty personalized, especially if you have a loyalty number. That can be a pretty specialized thing on the hotel. They will know your name when you get there, maybe not all. There's probably some hotels, probably the price of your hotel, the more likely they're going to know your name or make that effort to know your name, even though they probably all could based on your loyalty numbers. You go and you stay, you check in, and you get your hotel room. Your hotel room smells, or you find that your hotel is near the party down the hall and it's noisy, or it's middle of like Manhattan, and it's a loud room for whatever reason. What's going on in the hotel? What is some of the PTSD? What are some of the needs for lodging? I mean, that's really where you're spending the most of your time. You might get bed bugs in your bed or something like that, or there's a lot that can happen in that space. What is the perspective of somebody with PTSD? I mean, we all think bed bugs are obviously disgusting. So anybody would change the room if that's the case. But what is anything in that space that we should be aware of? Anything that would be could be considered, that would be customized in that hotel space for somebody with PTSD?
We've talked about the service thing, so I won't go into that. Like just helpful, happy people. I can say the most traumatizing thing for me at hotels has been connecting rooms. So unannounced connecting rooms. So I book a room or whatever, and I show up at a place and I'm connecting to someone else. For me, maybe I'm just lucky, but I no longer get those, because there were 2 incidents where someone has walked in to my room in the middle of the night, which as someone with kind of security issues, that's pretty over the top. So I feel like places should need to declare when you're going to be in one of those, and offer you the option of not being in one. Everything else, I think if places can understand that sometimes people will have special needs that aren't kind of visible disability needs. So sometimes I'm not going to want to be at a certain, like near certain, like positioned in certain places in hotel. I, as the consumer, need to be able to adequately express that in a way that's not me being a jerk. But on the receiving end, the place needs to realize that, okay, this is a reasonable request from someone that has a valid reason and a valid need. That's kind of the biggest thing I can say there. You mentioned like brands and things earlier. It's financially, it's not an option for everyone. I had my travel, like I had the Amex Platinum travel concierge for years, and that was such a valuable resource, because it was like every need, and you knew that it would be taken care of at a high level of comfort. what I could say beyond that is if there's if each of the different brands were to offer, I don't know how to call it branded, but like a disability hotline or disability number or whatever, like disability concierge almost, like that would be so helpful to people well outside of the PTSD space. Just someone who knows how to handle and address and work with the various needs that are out there. Just a specialist, and so that would be super valuable.
On the hotel room placement, so you're talking, you're not like, is it preferred to be at a lower floor or a higher floor? Is it preferred to be near an elevator or near a staircase or away from a staircase or elevator? I don't know if that matters, or, you mentioned,
it's one
placement
size
of a
fits.
room. What would be?
It's not one size fits all. It's going to be individually biased. Some people are going to want to be closer to exit. Some people are going to want to be further away. It kind of just depends what your thing is.
And the floor doesn't matter, high floor, low floor.
Again, individual
preference.
preference. Yeah. It's more, is the concern more, can I get out or can someone get in? So which side of that spectrum are they biased?
That's what it comes down to. How accessible is that room to somebody else to come in? Room service always has a key. What is early? I go through this like early in the morning. It's 9 a.m. I'm still in bed. I had a long night at the GBTA conference. So I'm like, there's like 9 a.m. And room service knocks on the door. Hey, can I come in? Is that any kind of trigger there? Is, knowing that somebody's knocking your door, trying to come in? Is there anything there that should be recognized by the hotel, the way that they could approach?
Yeah. So anything that's a violation, that feels like a violation of your personal space, your personal security, is triggering.
Noise levels. Might be really loud outside, but you feel secure inside, right? You don't have any. Could noise be a trigger for somebody with PTSD?
It could be. I don't know that. Yeah, it's the individual, up to the individual. And then, in a hotel situation, I don't know that it's much more than it would be triggering to anyone else. So the walking into your room service thing is far more, because that's an invasion of your personal safe space.
Yeah,
Awesome.
That's a good one. Okay. Okay. Well, I know we've gone over here, Zach, so appreciate your time. I don't want to hold you up. I apologize. At 12, I should have given you the exit if you wanted to take it. Is there anything else you want to share with us? Is there any other part of the travel journey that you could foresee there being an improvement for somebody with PTSD, something that's triggering, or something that, it sounds like a lot of it is customer service and that individual approach. And then it sounds like it's about security and the person feeling secure in the hotel room, not feeling like somebody can walk in. That's what I'm hearing a lot today, for sure.
I think,
is there anything that you want to add in that we didn't touch on?
Yeah, I think we hit on it. You kind of just mirrored it back. That's the biggest thing, is treat me like a human and let me know in any way possible that I'm not being specifically targeted, that this is just a thing that happens, and let's laugh about it if we can. And that's really the most helpful thing.
We touched on this. I'm just going through the chat here. So Carl, good comments here. The sun, we mentioned a little bit before, the Sunflower is interesting program. It is an identifier that somebody has really, but could also, so the trade-off there is like, folks will know, because you're aware of the lanyard, that you have, let's say, PTSD, but then maybe you'll get that level of customer service that you're looking for. I just think there'd be like a conflict there. Does somebody with PTSD want to be identified? You know, so even though the trade-off there is better customer service because you're being identified, or don't be identified, but you're not going to get that customer service. You know, it probably just comes down to, again, the person, what they would prefer in that case, whether they want to be identified or not identified, I would assume.
Yeah, but it leaves it up to them, and it's for a lot of people, that's the reason they don't get a service dog, a service animal, is they don't want to constantly be known as the person that needs that, or just the extra attention that it gets. So if I'm someone who doesn't like to be singled out, a service animal can really help me when I'm activated, but also everybody wants to come over and say hello and kind of whatever. And so it's kind of both sides there.
Great.
So the sunflower thing, it leaves it up to the individual. You know, maybe I'm just going to put this on when I'm flying, just because I need a little special help, or if there's a situation where something comes up, then people know. But then I can take it off or hide it. It leaves some flexibility.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate you participating in this interview and just giving us a better understanding of traveling with PTSD. So this was terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Zach. I'll talk to you later.
Yep,
Thank
have a good
you.
day.
Appreciate it, buddy.